Homage to Buddha Shakyamuni, homage to Manjushri, homage to all the lineage masters. Profound and subtle dharma is rarely encountered in eons. Now we can follow it. May we realize the Tathagata's meaning. To liberate all sentient beings, please generate unsurpassed bodhicitta. Now we will continue with our study. An overview of the secret commentary, thorough dispelling of darkness throughout the 10 directions, entitled Essence of Clear Light. It is also known as the General Exposition of the Guhyagarbha, Essence of Clear Light. Please turn to page 66 in your copies of the Essence of Clear Light. Last year we covered the first part of this text. We have already completed a general description of the 3 tantras of the Guhyagarbha. This year we will delve into the section on the view within the specific explanation of the Tantra of the Path. As mentioned previously, the Guhyagarbha is primarily explained through 10 or 11 core tantric topics. These include the view, conduct, mandala, samaya, empowerment, mantra, and so forth. In total, there are 10 such essential parts. When summarized, these represent the 10 key dharmas of secret mantra. If you can master these 10 topics, you will essentially understand the most crucial and fundamental points of the Vajrayana. Generally speaking, this is a teaching on both the theoretical framework and the direct introduction to the nature of mind. Regarding the depth and breadth of the Guhyagarbha Tantra, in terms of its breadth, it encompasses all the secret mantra teachings. As for its depth, it belongs to the Mahayoga. However, as Mifam Rinpoche noted, and I believe I mentioned this before, it represents the Atiyoga of Mahayoga. By this, I mean it is an exceptionally sublime teaching that integrates Mahayoga with the great perfection. Therefore, as we gather here to study this together, it is a truly rare opportunity for us to encounter such a profound secret mantra teaching. This teaching is a dharma of liberation through hearing. If you realize its meaning, the benefits are beyond words. Even if you practice for just a single session, for a brief moment, it can dispel the darkness of ignorance within your mind stream. Even for those who lack the time or the capacity for intensive practice, simply letting the sound of this secret mantra dharma reach your ears makes it a path of liberation through hearing. It is truly extraordinary. So I hope you'll all enjoy and really value this teaching. Without having accumulated vast merit, it is indeed very difficult to encounter such teachings. As for myself, it is on one hand extremely difficult to meet the strict qualifications required by the lineage masters, the tantras, and the shastras to teach the secret mantra. But on the other hand, when I reflect upon my own path and the time I spent with my guru, although there were moments when my teacher appeared displeased with me, I never let it rest overnight. I always purified and confessed them that same day. In terms of serving my guru's enlightened activities and maintaining a pure perception of him, I can say that I have no regrets in my entire life. Regarding the lineage, I may not have achieved the same level as Patrul Rinpoche or His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche, who never once received even a displeased look from their own teachers. While such absolute purity between teacher and disciple might not have been perfectly maintained throughout my life, looking at it from another perspective, I can confidently say that the golden chain of our lineage has never been stained by broken samayas. This is my assurance regarding the lineage. Regarding the view, I've reached a solid conceptual understanding, one that's built through careful reasoning and analysis. I believe I do have a proper understanding of the secret mantra's view. This isn't just a recent thing. Even long ago, when I first encountered secret mantra, I already had some insight, particularly into the view of the great perfection. I wouldn't say I'm enlightened, but I do have an understanding. For this reason, and because when His Holiness was with us then, He granted me permission to guide and teach you through various means. So with all these causes and conditions, I am sharing the Guhyagarbha Tantra with you today. Now let's move to the next section. Proving the profundity of the sublime view of mantra consists of 2 parts. First individually and second collectively. Whenever we practice any dharma, we need the view, meditation, conduct, and result. This means just as the Shravaka path requires a view, the path of secret mantra also requires its own view. We often talk about what the secret mantra view is all about. Having the secret mantra view does not simply mean not holding wrong views toward these teachings. It's more than that. The Vajrayana has its own unique qualities, and it's vital to understand them from the perspective of the view. When I first started teaching on the view here, at that time I felt that many people had gained some realization of this view. However, since then, many of our senior practitioners have already departed. Today we have many new Dharma teachers, as well as many Khenpos and Khenmos. Recently, during our post-class presentations and exams at Larungar, I've noticed that since we established the Buddhist society, we've attracted many people with high academic backgrounds and professional skills. They've given up everything to come here and dedicate themselves to study. However, if they don't gain a correct understanding of the view, meditation, conduct, and result of secret mantra, and they simply stay on this Tibetan plateau for years, only to return home with a basic Sutrayana understanding, I feel that just doesn't make sense. Teaching so many people can, in some ways, be an obstacle to my own practice and realization. My root guru, His Holiness, used to say this as well. He mentioned that because he taught the secret mantra so widely, it might prevent him from manifesting the rainbow body. He said that if he hadn't taught so extensively, he might have left this world in a rainbow body. That is precisely how His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche said. To be honest, the Vajrayana is just not that easy for most people. But I'm sharing this with you, moved by what I'd call a simulated compassion. My purpose in teaching this is that I really hope you all, especially the young monks and nuns here, will establish the authentic view of secret mantra. For the senior practitioners, you also need to have a proper and clear understanding of the Vajrayana. The way we establish this view is as follows. Individually is divided into first, proved as purity, second, proved as evenness, and third, proved as inseparability. This is extremely crucial. We often cite these points during our teachings. First, proved as purity as two parts. First, proving the way of purity, and second, refutation of opposing views. We must refute any opposing views others might have. Proving the way of purity consists of, first, proving appearances to be wisdom deities. Second, proving the subject to be wisdom. In reality, all appearances are nothing other than the manifestation of the deity. Nothing is impure. The subject refers to our consciousness, which is established as wisdom. It's what we often call afflictions or bodhi. These part is key. It would be best if you could memorize the entire chapter on view in the Guhyagarbha Tantra. If you do, I believe your irreversible faith in secret mantra will never waver. Proving appearances as wisdom. Deities has two parts. Proving appearances directly through the valid cognition of analyzing designated things, and proving through the power of the valid cognition of genuine analysis. Let's first discuss how it is proved directly through the valid cognition of analyzing designations. By this we mean that all things are inherently pure. We speak of purity first, then emptiness. Then we speak of the inseparability of purity and emptiness, or luminosity and emptiness. This is a common way of speaking in secret mantra. However, many people might not fully understand this. Even when practicing the great perfection, the main practice is primordial purity. Many find this concept of primordial purity difficult to grasp during practice. That is why it is so essential to understand the view. When we look at this, there are two ways to understand this purity. One is through the valid cognition of analyzing designated things. Even at the relative level, all appearances are pure. The other is establishing through the power of the valid cognition of genuine analysis. First, let's see how all things are pure at the level of relative truth. Usually, relative valid cognition involves inference and direct perception. Using ordinary inference and perception to establish purity can be quite difficult. But in secret mantra, we can achieve this. This is the difference between the Sutrayana and Vajrayana. In terms of the view, setting aside the ultimate, even in the relative reality, the secret mantra can indeed fully establish that all is pure. If you haven't studied this text, you might think, how can everything be pure in the relative sense? That's impossible. You certainly can't see this purity through ordinary direct perception. And as for inference, what kind of reasoning could possibly prove such purity? Some people might ask these questions. But next, how do we establish this purity through relative valid cognition? First, there are multiple lines of reasoning that prove that appearances are deities. For those whose minds believe that phenomena exist according to the way they appear, take the substantialist schools who assert the existence of an external reality, as well as many other worldly traditions that believe in an external reality. Before these various schools, we want to establish all appearances of all things are actually inseparable from the Buddhas and consorts we usually speak of. Don't we often say, for example, that afflictions are bodhi, the 5 elements are the 5 consorts, and the 5 aggregates are the 5 Buddhas? When people hear this, some people might think that's just talk. How could earth, water, fire, and wind become the 5 consorts? But actually, this is something we can prove. There are all kinds of ways to prove it, and in different commentaries on the Guhyagarbha, there are extensive scriptural and reasoning proofs. Nevertheless, to explain the essential crucial point, Jumi Pham Rinpoche has condensed all of this into a few core points, giving us these essential pith instructions. That is to say, a single substance such as water is, Hungry ghosts see it as pus and blood. Humans see it as water. Those dwelling in pure realms see it as a stream of nectar. And Arya Vidyadharas with pure vision see it as the kaya of Mamaki. Through touch, water acts as that which moistens, and to partake of it can even induce bliss and non-conceptual samadhi. In other words, if we say that everything is pure, can this be accepted in the relative sense? Yes, it can. How can we accept it? For instance, take a bowl of water. Hell beings regard it as molten iron, and hungry ghosts see it as pus and blood. To humans and some animals, it's seen as water that can satisfy their thirst. Those who abide in the pure realms see it as ambrosia. Devas see all this water as nectar now. Noble beings on the bhumis below the 10th, like those from the first bhumi upward, perceive it as mamaki. Mamaki is one of the 5 consorts. Among the 5 consorts, the nature of water is mamaki. Of course, there are 2 explanations for mamaki. One explanation is that she is a type of light. She is not necessarily a female deity in union with a Buddha. Her very nature is luminosity. The water element transforms into luminosity. When different beings contact the water, it performs the functions of moistening or nourishing. For some, to partake of it is to induce bliss and wisdom. For others, relying on it induces non-conceptual samadhi. This is because the water has different effects on different subjects, the beings who experience it. Or it can be explained as the different functions of mamaki. Both explanations are possible. The results brought by a single bowl of water are all different. So you see, even a single bowl of water has completely different effects for different beings. Given that all Buddhas who have fully exhausted all dormant passions and liberated all appearances see things according to the way things actually are, elaborations are then pacified, how does this bowl of water appear to the Buddha? In his wisdom that sees the true nature of things, everything is free from the 4 extremes and 8 mental fabrications. It's just as described in the root verses on the middle way. It isn't existent or non-existent, permanent or extinguished. It is the emptiness of the Dharmadhatu, free from all 4 extremes and 8 mental fabrications. By seeing the way things appear based upon the way they are, the Buddhas see the immeasurable domain of perfect purity, the phenomena of wisdom's self-appearances. In other words, before his all-encompassing wisdom, his knowledge of the full extent, it is an ultimate and perfectly pure display of boundless enlightened qualities. When we look at it this way, the point becomes clear. If there was something truly inherently impure about that bowl of water, then everyone would have to see it the same way. But they don't. When we look at it this way, step by step, we realize that the Buddha is the most reliable witness among all these observers. Imagine we have beings from the 6 realms gathered here, and with them are bodhisattvas, vidyadharas, and the Buddha. If all of them look at the exact same bowl of water, the conclusions they reach and the world they perceive will be completely different from each other. To a hungry ghost, it brings nothing but suffering. To a diva, it is blissful celestial nectar. The experience of a Vidyadhara and those in higher states is something else entirely. So we have to ask ourselves, so who is seeing it correctly? Is it the hell being or the Buddha? This isn't something we need to debate. You'd have to admit the truth. Of course, if you don't believe in the Buddha at all, that's a different matter. For people from other faiths who don't follow the Buddha, those who don't see him as a valid guide or believe he has such extraordinary wisdom, well, there's not much more to say. But if you truly have faith in the Buddha, then you must agree that among all observers, what the Buddha sees is the most pure. So when the Buddha looks at this bowl of water, to his wisdom of the nature of reality, it is emptiness, completely free from the 4 extremes and 8 mental fabrications. And to his wisdom that sees everything as it appears, it is the most ultimate luminosity. So our human vision isn't at the highest level. We don't see the pure light the way a Buddha does. But we're also not in the worst position like the hungry ghosts or hell beings. We don't constantly see pus or molten iron. We are somewhere in the middle. We should realize that when we see the things around us, our physical eyes don't actually see their true nature correctly. The conclusions we draw from our vision are actually quite deceptive. We should try to understand this principle. Due to the different ways that things are perceived, there are those who may wonder what is valid and what objects exist according to the way designations abide. Remember the different observers we mentioned? Among all these different observers, who is actually seeing the truth? Is the Buddha's vision correct, or is the hell being's vision correct? And what about what we humans see? In this world of appearances, whose perception is actually the valid one? Let's set aside the ultimate truth for a moment, as that level of realization is very high. In this world of appearances, what is the actual truth behind what we see? Since you might be wondering about this, here is the answer. However much the subject sees purity, it is valid to that extent, and that individual's perception is for them the way things are. This resembles how the mind perceives an object such as a conch to be either white or yellow. I think I might have already covered this point. In other words, the subject refers to the mind that experiences things. As this perceiving mind becomes purer, its vision becomes a valid authority. For example, if you compare a hell being and a hungry ghost, the hungry ghost perceiver is purer than the hell beings, so what the ghost sees is more valid. And when you compare a hungry ghost with a human, the human's perception of water is more correct. In the relative world, that is what we call the actual nature. As we go up level by level, it's just like in our daily life. Imagine one person has an eye disease that makes them see a white conch as yellow, but the other person's eyes are perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with them at all. They see the conch as it is, white. Now let me ask you, which one is right? Of course, the person with healthy eyes is right. And of the two objects perceived, which one is the reality? The white conch is the true reality. The yellow conch is just a distortion seen by a person with eye problems. It isn't the nature, it's an incorrect perception. We can look at it in this way. Next, Mipham Rinpoche uses a logical reasoning from the tradition of valid cognition. For that reason, the syllogism is, the topic is all appearances. It follows that they naturally abide as the mandlala of kayas and wisdom, because they are perceived as such by the Arya's pure seeing, which is free from all stains of incorrect understanding. For example, this is like seeing a conch shell with unimpaired eyes. We often say, the pillar is impermanent because it is created, just like a vase. We often use this kind of logical reasoning. This proof means that in the relative nature, everything you see is the inseparable purity of the Buddha's kayas and wisdom. Why? Because those awakened beings, who is free from all stains of incorrect understanding, see the inherent purity of all things. So why are they pure? This is a logical proof. This reasoning is absolutely irrefutable, so please keep it in mind. Anyone who has studied Buddhist logic knows how this kind of reasoning works. Is this reasoning pervasive? Is its reason established? As we just said, what the ayahs perceive is pure. In the relative reality, this truly stands as valid cognition. Can it be proved? This syllogism can be proved through both scriptural citation and reasoning. We are saying that all phenomena are the inseparable union of the Buddha's bodies and wisdom in the absolute reality. The reason is that Buddhas and Bodhisattvas see them as pure, just like a person with healthy eyes sees a white conch. If someone claims this isn't proven, we respond that it can be proved. Why? First, it can be proved through scripture. Second, we'll use logical reasoning. First, it is well known in the scriptures in general that those with the wisdom of transformation, who abide on the pure grounds, like see the realms and so forth as pure, generally speaking, even within the standard Sutrayana traditions, and throughout all Buddhist teachings, whether they are sutra or mantra, there are universally accepted scriptures that any Buddhist would recognize. They state that because the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas on the pure stages have achieved the ultimate wisdom of transformation, all things appearing right now are entirely pure. First of all, this is the initial thesis we are establishing. However, some may think that what these Aryas see is according to self-appearances, and that they do not see the objects ordinary persons see as pure. Some people might think Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are different from us. Even if the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas see things as pure, it is simply a self-manifestation within their own realization. This purity is a self-manifestation occurring within their own realization, and it is completely different from what ordinary people see. He has his view and I have mine. What I see are impure things, while what he sees are pure things. They would say the principle that when the mind is pure, the land is pure, only applies to the Buddha's own internal realization, and doesn't mean the actual world we all share is pure. But if you think that way, it is simply not correct. Think about it. If the Bodhisattva's vision were only their own self-manifestation, like a dream occurring only within their own private realization, then we couldn't call that a valid cognition of reality, because what he sees is not what I see. In fact, what we perceive is also that very same purity. We just fail to recognize it as such. This is why we consistently cultivate the ultimate view of mantra, that all phenomena are pure. Our ordinary perceptions, what we've always seen and heard, are actually not the truth at all. We are under a delusion. It is as if everyone is suffering from the same eye disease. Although there are many people, everyone sees a yellow conch. But the Buddhas and those who have purified their minds through the practice of Dzogchen, they see the conch as white. As their eye disease becomes increasingly purified, the yellow they used to see gradually transforms into white. It works just like that. So is the conch actually white or yellow? We have to say the yellow is just a distorted appearance for those with diseased eyes. In reality, its true nature is white. I think you can understand this. If someone claims what these Aryas see is according to self-appearances and not other appearance, that what they see is completely not what we all see, that argument doesn't hold up. If that were the case, it follows that no single common object to be seen by both pure and impure mind streams would exist. If that were true, for example, when looking at a pillar, the noble one would see the pure Dharmadhatu while the ordinary person sees something impure, and there wouldn't be a single common object to be seen. This was already analyzed in the Beacon of Certainty. However, that is not the case. Let's look at some scriptural evidence. Shariputra saw that the pure land of the Buddha was impure, whereas Brahmashikhan saw it as pure. This sparked a debate, at which time the Buddha revealed the pure land so that it could be witnessed by everyone simultaneously. Buddha said, "Although my realm has always been pure in this way, until now you have failed to see it." This is proven through the Buddha's own words in this famous story. I've mentioned this story in other classes before. It comes from the first chapter of the Vimalakirti Sutra, the Buddha land chapter. It's explained very clearly there. Once, while the Buddha was teaching, he said, "When the mind is pure, the land is pure. In all worlds, if your mind is pure, the land appearing before you is pure." That's what he said. At that time, Shariputra gave rise to a doubt and thought to himself, the Buddha says that when the mind is pure, all lands are pure. If that is true, then while the Buddha was practicing on the causal ground, his mind must have been impure. Now that he has attained Buddhahood, the Saha world we perceive is so full of suffering and imperfections. Therefore, his practice back then must have been deficient, which is why this Buddha land is not pure at this moment. At that moment, the Buddha already knew the thoughts in Shariputra's mind. The Buddha asked Shariputra, "If a blind person cannot see the sun and the moon in the sky, is that the fault of the blind person, or is it the fault of the sun and the moon?" Shariputra replied, "It is the fault of the blind person. The sun and the moon are without fault." Then the Buddha said, "In the same way, my Buddha land is actually perfectly pure. Those whose minds are not yet purified are unable to see this purity. This failure to see is not the fault of the world around you. It is a flaw within your own mind." At this time, the text refers to a figure named Brahmashikhi. In the Vimalakirti Sutra, he is known as the Brahma King Shikin. Essentially, these names refer to the same being. Regarding this Brahma King, the Lalita Vistara Sutra mentions him as well. When the Buddha first attained enlightenment and remained in silence, it was Brahma King Shikin who requested him to teach. He offered a Dharma wheel and a white conch, requesting the Buddha to turn the wheel of Dharma. That was Brahma King Shikin. This is how it is described in several scriptures. In this story, he stepped forward to speak with Shariputra. He said that as he saw it, the entire realm of Shakyamuni Buddha was pure. The realm is an appearance of utter purity and luminosity, as pure as the palace of Maheshvara. At that moment, the two of them began to argue. Shariputra insisted that this cannot be right because we see nothing but rocks, rubble, and thorns. The ground is uneven and full of pits. He questioned how one could call this land pure, but the Brahma King insisted that he saw everything as pure. To settle this, Shakyamuni Buddha pressed the ground with his toe. Suddenly, the entire great Trichiliacosm was transformed into a majestic state. It became a land of sublime purity for all those present to behold. Then the Buddha spoke to him. Then the Buddha told him, "In truth, my world has always been this pure. It is just that certain individuals like you, Shariputra, could not recognize it. You see, even Shariputra failed to see it at first. Therefore, we should feel no sense of regret. Shariputra was a great arhat and was the foremost in wisdom. If even a sage of his supreme realization perceived it this way, we must acknowledge that our own wisdom is not so great. So it is understandable that we do not see the purity either." The Buddha explained that while a few may not see it, in reality my Buddha land is inherently pure. He compared it to the celestial nectar enjoyed by the devas. The taste of that nectar varies for each deva, and it depends on their own merit. For some, the food tastes truly delicious. For others with less merit, it might not taste nearly as good. The Buddha used this analogy to explain the situation. When we rely on scriptural authority, you will find that there is no need to analyze definitive versus expedient meanings. Furthermore, this point can be confirmed through logical reasoning. If we only had scriptures, we as Buddhists would have to accept it. Because the Buddha is a valid teacher, we must acknowledge his words. In the Lankavatara Sutra, the Buddha also stated, "Noble ones perceive the purity of all phenomena, thereby attaining the three doors of liberation. As noble beings, they perceive all things as inherently pure. Moreover, from this vision of purity, the three doors of liberation are naturally realized. These types of proofs are abundant within the sutras. Thus, the present similarity to this must be understood. If one fails to compare the way of seeing a single object by way of the nature just as it is, and one will be unable to establish the difference between what is true or false concerning appearances, such as the yellow conch versus the white. This is because valid cognition is being established based merely upon one individual's perception. Therefore, in the objects we perceive, there must be a relative actual nature. Think about the objects of perception, for example, what a hungry ghost sees and what a human sees. If we had no unified standard at all, no way to say this is truth and this is false, or this is mistaken and this is correct, then we would lose our grounding. In our relative world, we absolutely need a way to make such judgments. If we lack this, then whatever anyone sees would be considered correct. Then you would have to say the pus and blood seen by hungry ghosts are real, and that the water seen by humans is also correct. Even the nectar seen by devas would be correct. But what does this logic force you to admit? Ultimately, it implies that if the yellow conch seen by someone with diseased eyes is correct, and the white conch seen by someone with healthy eyes is also correct, then in this world, even the falling hairs seen by someone with diseased eyes would be correct. If you press your eyes and see two moons in the sky, that would be considered correct as well. If that were true, then many distorted perceptions in the world would suddenly become valid cognition. When we studied the beacon of certainty, we discussed this. Generally speaking, from the perspective of ordinary beings and what they see, their perception might be considered valid for them temporarily. For example, from the perspective of hungry ghosts, the pus and blood they see is correct for them. Similarly, the water that we see is also correct for us as humans. However, if we look at the big picture, between what a human sees and what a hungry ghost sees, which one is correct? We'd say that what humans see is correct. Otherwise, what is seen by a diseased eye and a healthy eye would both be correct. Suppose one person knows that a pillar is impermanent, while someone else who has never studied believes it is permanent. If everyone's opinion were equally valid, we could never reach a true conclusion. Is the pillar permanent or impermanent? We would never be able to decide, but that isn't how reality works. In fact, the understanding of impermanence is correct, and the belief in permanence is wrong. So regarding the nature of all phenomena, you must realize that from the enlightened perspective of a Buddha, our ordinary view is not pure at all. If that presentation were the case, then the descriptions of valid and invalid cognition would vanish without a trace. If that were the case, then in the world there would be no distinction between correct and incorrect. The principles of valid and invalid cognition would be completely lost. If that were the case, it would be impossible to establish in the world who is valid and who is not, but we know that's not true. In our world, the concepts of correct and incorrect are vital. Except for pure self-appearances, there would be no impure reality existing elsewhere. Aside from this pure self-appearances, even though you cannot see it right now, you should have deep conviction. The true nature of everything you perceive is inherently pure. There is nothing impure in the external world. As the verse summary of Prajnaparamita states, know that the purity of form is resultant purity. The purity of the resultant form will become the purity of omniscience. Omniscience is pure form and result, undivided, indivisible, and comparable to space. This is from the verse summary of Prajnaparamita, which we studied last year. It's in the second chapter. The meaning is this: the form of the object is pure, and the result within our subjective mind is also pure. Since both form and result are pure, then the ultimate omniscience wisdom of a Buddha is also pure. Conversely, the Buddha's omniscience wisdom and the purity of form are interconnected. Even during his causal stage, both the objects and the mind are inherently pure. Generally speaking, just as space has no boundaries, the entire world is naturally pure. In truth, you cannot find even a speck of impurity anywhere. We can also interpret it this way. Purity of form refers to the purity of the ground within the ground, path, and fruition. Purity of result refers to the path from the first to the 10th bhumis. This includes the purity of the path of seeing and the path of meditation. Purity of the resulting form is the final fruition, the state of no more learning. This state is actually the purity of omniscience wisdom. This wisdom, in turn, confirms the purity of the ground, path, and fruition. Applying this to the ground, path, and fruition is also acceptable. Alternatively, it can be explained through object and subject. I recall Mipham Rinpoche, in his commentary on the verse summary of Prajnaparamita, in this there is nothing to be removed, nor the slightest to be added. Look rightly at reality, seeing rightly one is released. He explained it in terms of the perceived object and the perceiving subject. We finished studying that a year or two ago. When you have a moment, you might want to check how Mifam Rinpoche explained it. The essence is this: all phenomena within the ground path and fruition are essentially pure. Thus, just as taught, when the subject is free from stain, the object will be seen as pure. Once the obscurations of the subject are completely cleared away, the object that is perceived is also seen in its pure state. That is the actualization of the intrinsic nature of the object just as it is, analogous to the mind-reversing fixation upon the conch as yellow. In other words, the purity of the object appears exactly as it is. It is just like the white conch appearing once the delusion of yellow is removed. The Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment also states, sentient beings and lands share the same Dharma nature. Hells and heavenly palaces are all pure lands. This means that these impure things seen by ordinary beings don't exist in their true essence. Any external thing we see now is only because our senses haven't yet reached the true reality of the object. This is why Sutrayana often teaches, the eyes, ears, and nose are not valid sources of knowledge, neither are the tongue, body, or mind. This is the reason behind those words. People today are truly pitiable. Everyone is stained by various habitual tendencies of ignorance and affliction. Not only do we fail to see purity, we even fail to see impermanence. Even more seriously, we are caught in all sorts of deluded appearances of greed, anger, and delusion. In their essence, however, it's not that they don't exist just because we say so. In fact, they are pure. It is just that we have not realized it yet. Second, this is also proved through reasoning. We just use scriptural authority. If you believe the Buddha, that faith will bring immense benefit. Since the Buddha said the world is inherently pure, we must accept it. That is accepting the purity of all phenomena through Scripture. I've added citations from the Lankavatara Sutra and the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment to supplement the proofs provided by Mifam Rinpoche. Beyond Scripture, logical reasoning also holds. All appearances are indeed pure. Why is that? Let us look at the reasoning below. The fact that a single object can be perceived in different ways is commonly accepted throughout the world. For a single object, whether it's that bowl of water or any other object, various appearances are perceived. Even with something like a bowl of rice or vegetables, everyone has different experiences. Some find it delicious, others find it just okay, and some find it not tasty at all. If 10 different people were to test a single dish and ask them to rate it from A to D, you would likely find that the actual way they see it and their evaluations of good or bad vary significantly. This is established through direct perception in the world. When one is familiar with the intrinsic purity of phenomena and basic space as non-dual, the discernment of appearances is then based entirely upon their intrinsic purity. It is proved by valid inference that ultimate lucid appearances will then manifest. First, it is a fact of direct perception that existing objects appear in various ways. If we habituate ourselves in this way, knowing that while some see pus and blood and others see water, the Buddha sees only luminous purity, and we practice by recognizing this intrinsic luminous nature. For example, hungry ghosts or animals might not know how to practice, but as humans we can. All phenomena are originally pure. If we constantly habituate ourselves to this pure vision, as being inseparable from the Dharma Dhatu, what will happen after practicing in this way? All things will appear as they truly are, in their natural purity. This reaches the Buddha's level at last, the ultimate luminous appearance. This ultimate luminosity will definitely manifest. And we can confirm this through valid inference as well. I've mentioned this before, even for ordinary people. For example, if someone practices the meditation on impurity, they keep visualizing until their external perception actually changes into a skeleton. A white skeleton can indeed manifest to them. One of Nagarjuna's disciples visualized a horn growing on his head, and then visualized it disappearing. This was also successful. This shows what can be achieved even through intense habituation in ordinary life. It's just as Mifam Rinpoche said, how much more so when the Dharma Dhatu is pure by its very nature. While beings currently have temporary deluded stains, these can be gradually removed. You must recognize this pure nature. Upon this pure nature, if you habituate yourself and practice over and over again, you will eventually reach the state of true luminous appearance. This conclusion is entirely supported by valid inference. So, for the root reasoning we mentioned earlier, that the appearance of all things is pure, because it is what the stainless wisdom of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas sees. The basis for this logic can pervade. According to the principles of Buddhist logic, if the Buddha sees it as pure, then it is decisively pure. This is logical. It fulfills pervasion in both positive and negative cases. This is because a pure vision is never mistaken. Why? Pure vision refers to the perception of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. The vision of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas is absolutely free from error. It follows that to see in this way is genuine. What they perceive is definitely the way things are. If this purity did not pervade all appearances, then the pure vision of the Buddhas would be false, implying that what they see is incorrect. At the same time, impure vision would then have to be true, meaning what ordinary people see would be the actual truth. If so, one would have to accept that sublime beings have incorrect understanding, while those who are ordinary have correct understanding. But is that even possible? Of course not. Who could possibly respect such a doctrine, and what proponent of logic would advocate it? We really need to reflect on this point deeply. What we perceive is entirely impure. What the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas perceive is pure. The fact that their vision is the truth has already been established by scriptural authority. So let us ask, is our perception correct? Or is the vision of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas like Manjushri and Shakyamuni Buddha correct? For those who respect Buddhism, they will certainly admit that the Buddha's vision is correct. Even if someone doesn't respect Buddhism, as long as they value reasoning, is the object seen by a wise person free of all stains correct? Or is the object seen by an ignorant person full of pollution correct? When put this way, even if they don't accept Buddhas or Bodhisattvas, they still have to acknowledge the difference between the wise and the ignorant, between what the wise and the ignorant see, which is correct. In the end, they must say that what the wise person sees is correct. At this point, we should realize that the principle of all things being inherently pure is not only found very often in Secret Mantra, but also in the sutras, in Sutrayana as well. Everyone knows the Vimalakirti Sutra is a Sutrayana text. The Perfect Enlightenment and Avatamsaka Sutras are Sutrayana. The Nirvana and Lankavatara Sutras are also sutras. In these and countless other scriptures, the principle that when the mind is pure, the land is pure is stated repeatedly. It's just that many great masters and followers of the Sutrayana may only say that everything is pure in words. When I went to the Chinese University of Hong Kong to speak on pure mind, pure land, many professors nodded, agreeing that when the mind is pure, the land is pure. But I wondered to myself, how much do they really understand? It is hard to say if they know what a pure mind is, or how it is actually pure. I was not saying they did not know. But in reality, many people today, when it comes to the truth of pure mind, pure land, though it is explained in many scriptures, to truly master it, it is very difficult to understand without a solid logical foundation. Even after a lifetime of studying sutras and tantras, including some in Tibetan region who chant mantras and receive empowerments every day, which is a very common thing to see, if they lack this kind of logical support, it is very difficult to build a truly correct view. So the point here is that the view of purity is correct. One has to admit that what the Buddha sees is the truth. Conversely, what ordinary beings see is incorrect. This must be established. Here, pure seeing means that the higher would fault the lower. The perception of a first Bhumi Bodhisattva is correct and can refute those who haven't reached that level. The view of a 10th Bhumi Bodhisattva can refute those below them. And the view of a bodhisattva can demolish the view of an ordinary person. But can the view of an ordinary person ever demolish the view of the Buddhas and bodhisattvas? Absolutely not. But in this Dharma-ending age, it seems even ordinary people are making all kinds of comments about Shakyamuni Buddha or Chandrakirti. Many ordinary people truly overestimate themselves at times. It is quite absurd, tragic, even pitiful and regrettable. The lower would be incapable of faulting the higher. It is impossible for the wisdom of an ordinary person to fault the wisdom of a sage. For example, could a kindergarten student's knowledge surpass that of a university professor? It's impossible. No matter how smart you are probably just the clever one in the kindergarten. Sometimes when we see ordinary people trying to judge the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, or the sages of the past, it truly leaves us not knowing whether to laugh or cry. It is a very strange feeling. These people are truly pitiable. Do they possess even 100th, 1,000th, or a 10,000th, even a millionth of the wisdom these great masters held? If not, yet they still shout and act so arrogant, as if they were someone special when they criticize others. It is truly a sad thing to see. In Entering the Middle Way, it states, a person with blurred vision cannot claim visual defect in one whose sight is clear. Just as in the world, what a person with healthy eyes sees cannot be refuted by someone with a vision problem. If a person seeing a yellow conch says, The white one you see is wrong. I clearly see it as yellow, so it must be yellow. Everyone else would just think his own eyes are not good, how pitiable. That's what they would say. Likewise, a mind lacking stainless wisdom cannot claim that a stainless mind is flawed. Similarly, the ordinary mind that is far from pure wisdom, or the intellect of a lower being filled with wrong views, can never undermine the stainless wisdom of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. In this world, such a thing is absolutely impossible. So it is not just a matter of Buddhism praising itself. The truth is, compared to any other religion today, we can confidently say to anyone, with full assurance, in terms of logic, wisdom, compassion, and every other aspect, it stands up to any school of thought or religion. We can speak out. At this time, we must realize that impure intellect cannot harm stainless wisdom. Therefore, we have to admit that what ordinary people perceive is actually not very accurate. Just like the verse states, the Buddhas who have thoroughly purified all stains see phenomena precisely as they appear. The Buddha has not the slightest cognitive or afflictive obscurations. Through his wisdom of the full extent, which is the wisdom that primarily perceives relative nominal reality, he clearly sees the nature of all phenomena. Except for whatever is seen as the pure nature of phenomena, there is nothing to improve upon, since this is the ultimate fundamental nature of designated relative appearances. What the Buddha sees is the highest realization possible. In his wisdom, the ultimate fundamental nature of designated relative appearances is pure. This can be established by taking the Buddha's valid cognition or wisdom as the premise. As a result, it is crucial to distinguish the twofold approach to relative phenomena, one from the perspective of confusion and the other from the perspective of how the relative actually abides. Any relative phenomenon, anything within the range of all extent knowledge, one aspect is how it manifests to a deluded being, and the other is the nature of designated relative appearances. Both exist. Take a bowl of water. Before deluded minds, a hell being sees one thing, a hungry ghost sees another, and a human sees something else. These different beings are all deluded, seeing only their own versions. None of these are its ultimate true nature. The ultimate truth is what the Buddha sees, the pure and luminous side of things. This is its correct and true appearance. In fact, even a pillar has two aspects within the realm of relative truth. One is the most pure and luminous aspect perceived by the Buddha. In the ordinary world, for example, what do I see when I look at this pillar? I know that although it appears static now, it is actually changing moment by moment. It is impermanent. But take a taxi driver who has never studied any philosophy. If we go out to the street, find a driver and pull him over here and ask, "What is this pillar?" He would say, "It is permanent. It doesn't change." He hasn't learned about impermanence, so my view is slightly closer to the truth, while his view lacks the understanding of impermanence entirely. If you even brought a yak here and let it look at the pillar, it might not give an answer. It might see the pillar directly with its eyes, but it wouldn't say anything, maybe just a moo, and that's it. Therefore, any relative phenomenon has two types of results. This point is really crucial. The valid cognition of analyzing designations is nothing more than ordinary short-sightedness. In fact, what is usually called the valid cognition of analyzing designations is just our ordinary perspective. This ordinary perspective generally includes the direct perceptions and inferences of ordinary people. If one believes that what they see is the ultimate reality of relative truth, if you think this ordinary perspective is the final truth, then that wisdom is extremely shallow. Even within Tibetan Buddhism today, a few specific schools claim that this ordinary relative valid cognition is the ultimate truth of designations. There is such a claim, but one cannot say that. If you do, what you gain through direct perception and inference is limited. No matter how much I analyze through logical inference, the primordial purity of a pillar cannot be deduced that way. No matter how I look with my five senses, I cannot see it. Regarding the true nature of the pillar, there is also something else. Pure vision, valid cognition. What he is referring to here is likely pure vision, valid cognition. Without it, if you only rely on ordinary direct perception and inference, it is a sign of shallow wisdom. If carefully examined, this is the same as an indiscriminate mind that fails to distinguish whether seeing a conch as white or yellow is correct or incorrect valid cognition. If you really hold that view, it means you haven't thoroughly understood the case of the white and yellow conch. Since both can be seen and both have a direct perception, then valid cognition and non-valid cognition would become indistinguishable. That would be sheer carelessness. If there is no other nature aside from the way an ordinary person sees things, then the appearance of a yellow conch to the one who perceives it as yellow would become the way the conch truly is. But we cannot accept this. If you think the things ordinary people see every day, and the reality perceived by the eyes, ears, and nose are all there is to this world, and that no higher truth exists in the realm of relative truth, that would be like saying there is no white color beyond what a sick person sees as yellow. That makes no sense. We aren't even talking about emptiness yet. Even within relative truth, white is the reality of the conch, while yellow is not. The various appearances we see now, such as this pillar, or the pus and blood seen by hungry ghosts, or the water seen by humans, beyond these perceptions, there is a level of relative truth that is pure. What the Buddhas and Vidyadharas perceive is a much more profound level of purity. Because of this, practicing the generation stage and completion stage is perfectly logical. It is logical to practice seeing all phenomena as pure. When we visualize deities, whether we visualize Shakyamuni Buddha or Amitabha Buddha, why do we do this for any of these practices? It is because their nature is inherently pure. Within our own minds, a deity that is naturally pure can appear. This is indeed a specific form, but this form is able to manifest because its nature is inherently pure. If one does not realize this, then visualizing Shakyamuni Buddha would be no different from visualizing any other ordinary form. There would be no distinction between what is true and what is false. So on this issue, why do we practice the generation stage? What is the reason that all phenomena become pure in the generation stage? At the highest level, it is said that all things are primordially pure. When practicing the primordial purity of great perfection, the minds of beings in the six realms and the mind of Samantabhadra are inseparable. They are the same not only in the ultimate sense, but even in the relative. The analogy of the conch we just discussed is the most incisive and fitting illustration of this. The varying perceptions across the six realms are also a key point. These all describe the relative truth of things. Therefore it is said, if you do not accept this truth, then you have to admit that there is no truth to the conch other than its yellowness. If one thinks that this way of seeing fails to cognize reality because it is tainted by the cause of confusion, if you believe that the yellow conch just mentioned is what a person with an eye problem or a distorted mind sees, and that it is not the actual truth, then you must also admit that although ordinary persons perceive all impure appearances tainted by negative habits, these impure phenomena, the mountains, rivers, and earth that appear to us, are not the actual reality. The nature of their phenomena is the same as whatever appears to those whose minds are absolutely free from the stain of habits. Just as the white conch was described earlier, the truth should manifest clearly. Although we are currently obscured by various negative habits, just as someone with an eye problem sees a yellow conch and cannot see the white one, this distorted vision is not the reality. The true reality manifests fully before those who are free from all stains, just like the white conch. We should often reflect on how pitiable sentient beings are. Everything they see is not the truth. Even the essence and reality of the thoughts they have are actually pure. The other day I visited Guangxi Normal University. Someone there said, I am a student of Marxism-Leninism. Could you summarize the essence of Mahayana Buddhism in just 4 words? I said, I can certainly do that. But since you study Marxism-Leninism, you should also summarize that viewpoint in 4 words. Do you know what he said to me? Dialectical materialism. That's more than 4 words in Chinese, but there were many people there, so I didn't argue. Actually, dialectical materialism is an ideology, not necessarily his specific point. He just mentioned it as a general summary. When it was my turn, I said, afflictions of Bodhi. That's 5 characters in Chinese. He had said 4 or 5. This means that the nature of affliction is itself enlightenment, which we will discuss later. So, the reality we see is actually pure. Without studying the Guhya Garbha Tantra, many people wouldn't know why this reality is pure. But once you learn these principles and reflect on them and observe them in your daily life, you will realize everything we see is just distorted by habits, so we miss the truth. In reality, the essence of every phenomenon is not as it appears. Therefore, our senses and even our thoughts are not that reliable. If we keep practicing these teachings, a purer and more ultimate state will surely manifest. Let's stop here for today.
Bandara Banma Sodargye